So this is Mark performing the wedding ceremony for my good friends Alexander and Carmel.
In Thailand.
Thailand, that's right, yeah. Sister Tina's wedding. So that's Tina in the pink behind, and her and fiance now, husband Leroy. And next to Mark is my niece Xenia, who I think is on the call as well.
Yeah, there's her husband.
So yeah, once again, and behind, very nice. Behind Xenia is oh, there we go. This was my wedding on the beach in Boracay in the Philippines. That's me and my wife, Lily, and my sons, Alex and Dexter, and my mom.
Hi.
So anyway, let me start. I want to just read. I wrote some notes of my memories of Mark, and then if Kathy is with us, I'll have her sing something. And anyway,
she's with us.
Oh, great. Hey, Lan.
Hi.
Hey, Jane.
Hey. Okay, Baba.
I want to welcome everybody to the celebration of the life of Marc Brutus. When I first heard the news he had died, I was very sad. It was hard for me to talk about it for several days. His loss was such a void in my life because he filled it so much with his warmth and presence. And he was so unique, and his heart could respond to anybody. If you knew Mark, you knew this about him. He had the ability to warm a stranger's heart, as he knew how to make people feel special and loved. If you ever phoned Mark and he wasn't available to talk, you would hear this message in his unique, rich voice. It said, Jai Meher Baba, this is Mark. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you. It was always good to hear that message. In fact, after I got news that he had died, I called his phone once more just to hear the greeting, thinking I didn't know if I'd ever hear his voice again. It's interesting, after I called that number to hear his voice, the police called right back because they had his phone wanting to know who it was. So in my last conversation with Mark, just a few days before he died, he shared this story with me. He told me that he would walk to the post office to get his mail each day because he said he needed the exercise for his health. And on the way to the post office, he would pass what he called a beautiful but malnourished pit bull chained up in a backyard, no matter how severe the weather was. And the dog would bark ferociously at him or anybody who passed by. Seeing the dog chained up like that and underfed, he decided that he wanted to give it a treat each day that he walked by. So he asked the owners if that was okay. They said it was. So soon Mark and the dogs became good friends.
That might be him.
It is.
Mark said of the dog, he is a living being. He deserves to be treated humanely. So I give him treats, even though it isn't practical for me to do so. So that sums up, how Mark related to everybody through love and kindness. 40 years ago, Mark and I co-wrote a play called The Springtide of Creation. It was a most soul-stirring work. It was the most soul-stirring work that we ever did together. In fact, it was about a group of souls on the other side who debated amongst themselves whether it was a good idea or not to have a new lifetime on Earth with all the challenges that modern life presents. Anyway, the play performed in Los Angeles, and other people performed it in Washington, D.C., Myrtle Beach, and Marizad in India. It touched a lot of hearts. When we were performing it with our cast of 12 in downtown Los Angeles at the East West Cultural Center, about a dozen elderly women whom I had never seen before came up to Mark afterwards to say how much they enjoyed it. And Mark responded to them all, giving them all hugs as if they were the most important people in the world. I asked him who they were, and he said, "Oh, just some woman in my neighborhood that I got to know on my walks." So I invited them. Mark, as you may know, wasn't particularly an athletic person, but he loved sports. In most of our phone conversations over the years, we talked a lot about football or baseball. And we played a lot of football and softball with friends in Los Angeles when I lived there in the 1980s. 40 years later, he would still remind me of a special play I made in a game that Jeff McGuire, Michael Campagna, myself, and Mark played against a group of 4 others that Jeff knew. We called that game the Baba Lovers versus the Christians, and we won. Another memory he shared with me, he told me that when he was a kid in South Africa, that he learned to box from Nelson Mandela.
Wow.
Nelson Mandela, later the president of South Africa, was a friend of Mark's father, both of whom served time at the infamous Robben Island prison in South Africa. In fact, in 1983, while Nelson Mandela was still in prison, Mark's father, Dennis Brutus, then a professor of literature at the University of Pittsburgh, but still a political activist, was being threatened with deportation back to South Africa by the Reagan administration, which deemed him a threat to U.S. national security. This was a life-threatening matter to Mark's father, as there were known assassination squads waiting for him in South Africa. The apartheid government there had not forgotten that it was Dennis Brutus that got South Africa's Olympic team expelled from the 1968 Games in Mexico City for having an all-white Olympic team in spite of the nation being 90% Black. So Mark and I decided to interview Dennis, as well as the INS attorney leading a case against him, and write a story about it. At the time, I worked for the Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and I pitched the story idea to the editors there, and they agreed to syndicate it both in the United States and around the world. I heard the outcome of the case on the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. The court ruled in favor of Mark's father. Many people who knew Mark when he was in his 20s knew him as a talented mime. I'll show a video clip of him performing mime a little later. He was also a talented cook. He was one of the earliest members of the kitchen staff at the very first cheesecake factory, which opened in Beverly Hills. He also worked with special needs children. He joked about a basic English class he was teaching in East Los Angeles, a part of town that he called the wrong side of the tracks. He told it like this: "Now, class, what comes after a sentence?" And a kid in the back of the room yells out, "An appeal." Another interesting job he had for a while was as a hotel-motel reviewer for a travel guide. He was given a brand new Lincoln Town Car to drive throughout California. He said in one small town he was driving through, he was pulled over just because he was a young Black man driving a fancy car. He really enjoyed the review writing, but eventually the publication stopped paying him, so he had to quit. He at one time in his life also became a locksmith. And when he had prostate cancer, John Page of the Meher Montessori schools gave him a job teaching acting to the students. This enabled Mark to be insured in the group health insurance of the school, and he successfully was able to treat the cancer. And a couple years ago, when he was really struggling in Los Angeles, having been evicted from his apartment and living in hotel rooms, I suggested the possibility of being the caretaker at the Heartland Center in Prague, Oklahoma. And he and the Heartland Center came to an agreement, and that was the last job he had. And that ended when he started having his most recent health issues. But despite however hard life was, he was always cheerful on the phone. He would always send birthday cards and Christmas cards. On our last phone conversation, just a few days before he died, he said, "You know, we are no longer spring chickens." I said, "Yes, but soon we get to do it all over again. That is, we get to reincarnate." I reminded him of Mayor Bob's words that the avatar in just this cycle of cycles of time has taken birth millions and billions of times. And Mark's last words in response to this, and the last words I ever heard him speak, "Yes, and all for the sake of love, all for the sake of love. Jai Baba, Greg." And that was it. So Kathy, if you're there, would you like to sing a song?
Thank you for inviting me to share a song that somehow has given me a lot of hope over the years, and hope it will fill everybody else with loving remembrance of our Mark.
Kathy, I just want to remind you to put on original sound if you have not.
Okay, so do you have original sound?
I don't know what that means.
Oh, I know. Sometimes it's up in the, depends on what type of device you have.
Yeah.
We're on an Apple laptop.
Yeah. I am too. Okay, so there should be a little thing up on the top left that says
Recording.
turn on original sound.
Is it like the original word or the original whim or something like that?
Yes, exactly. And if you don't find it, at least you don't worry.
Use background filter. Video settings. Would it be under video settings?
Let's see. Did you look at top left corner?
Up left corner, there's a check and a recording button.
Oopsie-doodle.
So the check says Baba Family Meeting, bingo,
Okay.
link.
Okay. Did you hear me singing or not? Did you hear my?
Yeah, don't worry about it. If it's not handy, we won't even worry. Just go ahead with your song. We heard you fine.
You can hear me fine. Okay.
Yep.
It just makes a little better blend with the guitar, but it's not essential.
Okay.
Thanks for looking, ladies.
Okay.
Good to
Built-in
see
mic.
Alicia this way too. Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, built-in mic.
Okay, we'll try our best.
All right. Oh, original sound. Here we go.
Okay. And you hit that for on. That's, yeah. Just hit it. Yep.
The tech whizzes. Thank you.
Wow.
Lovely.
All right.
When the day is here, the sand is so dry, it can't even hear a single bird's cry. This desert of love, fold us up in your arms, fold us up in your arms, fold us up in your arms, baby. Fold us up in your arms, fold up in your eyes. Mayhem. When the day is gone, night is here, the loneliness and dark fill us with fear. Wrap us up in your love. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms, baby. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Mayhem. When the ocean is so wide and our ships are so small, the waves across our bows crash and fall. Lend your hand to steer. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms, baby. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Hold us up in your arms. Mayhem.
Thank you, Kathy.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, I'm going to play this presentation from Mark's brother, Tony. It's a recording that he made the other day, his memories of Mark. So I'll do a screen share in just a moment.
Greetings to Greg and all the folk at the Mayor Barber Center, to Mark's family, my brothers and sisters who may be linking in, to everyone. Hello, this is Tony, Mark's brother, Tony Brutus in Cape Town. I felt great sadness when word came from Oklahoma of the death of my brother Mark. In the email, the phrase that stirred me was about Mark had a difficult life, or was it rather a life lived with difficulty? Here's the story. Mark did not shrink or shirk the difficulties or complexities of life. No, he was vital and a strong person to the core. We grew up in the ghetto of Port Elizabeth in an oppressive, murderous country. It added to our troubles that Dennis, our father, was locked in prison and locked in struggle against the system. But that meant he was leaving hungry mouths to feed. We were cared for by our mother as a single parent, and of course, Mark and others of our children went out to work. Even as children, we worked to earn a little money to share the burden of surviving. And here's the thing. Mark made sure we grew up with laughter. Mark was an entertainer. He also had a taste for danger and adventure. We spent many hours in our tiny kitchen, tap dancing, foot stomping, bragging. And even after we were told to go to bed, into our shared bed, the talking hardly stopped. And look, even if we didn't have the appetite for danger, danger certainly came looking for us. As an example, the night that we left our home in Port Elizabeth, Mark had to go to the hospital, to the emergency center, because he ended up with a nail, one of these construction industry explosive nails in his foot. And so that's where he started before we finally made the journey. From South Africa across the equator to the cold, damp, and simmering resentment of London, England, we attended Catholic schools. You know, they have the ethos, spare the rod, spoil the child. But Mark grew his hair long. He spoke his mind openly, and then the system made him pay the painful dues. You know, Mark had marvelous taste in music. We grew up singing the Beatles, Frank Sinatra, Otis Redding, Ray Charles, Roberta Curtis Mayfield, Booker T. But that taste in music turned to ballads, folksy, meditative music when Mark turned to Meher Baba. All the love songs he knew, his sighs, his declarations were suddenly all about Baba. For this, by the family, he was teased, mocked, and even derided. But being Mark, he wore those insults with pride. For some few weeks and months, I went to the Baba Center in London with him, but I didn't stay. Such was the searching for an identity and for sanctuary that, as you know, people cast adrift, we did. In the early or mid-70s, we followed Dennis to Evanston, Illinois. Mark worked as a short-order cook in burger bars. Mark spent his time perfecting his mime. I remember particularly a two-handed show as a broken toy tin soldier with a ballerina. Meanwhile, at Jim's Charbroil, Mark picked up a smattering of Greek phrases, as well as admiring glances from some of the regulars, but the air was punctuated with his declarations and sighs about Baba. I moved away, went to college, and Mark and I were not in contact anymore. There was a time I explored distant countries, and Mark had my back. He looked after my finances. I left the US, to Zimbabwe, to New Zealand, and with difficulty all of us had in obtaining travel documents, I didn't manage to see Mark for a long while. My enduring memory of Mark was his living alone in his bare bones, not a bean to his name, yet proud and brave even in his worst distress. From Mark's life, I learned to be persistent, to be patient, to suffer tough love, but to live to love again. Rest in peace, Mark.
Tony, you there still?
I can see Tony's there, but he appears to be on mute. Tony, do you want to unmute yourself? Of course, he may be having troubles with the blackout as well. We may have lost him. But...
Greg, while you're here, you wrote a wonderful memory of Mark as well. I can read it, or if you have it there, I'd like you to read it.
I do have it here, so why don't I go ahead?
Go ahead.
If that's okay, Greg?
Yes.
Great, thank you. First and foremost, thank you so much, Greg and others, for pulling all of this together. We really appreciate you guys. We know that he was cared for, he was loved, particularly in these kind of final months and years. It's been very tough for him. So, thank you so much for putting all of this together. And I know that my sister Tina and Zania have also been, very much involved with sorting out Mark's affairs. So thank you to Azania and Tina as well. So I'm Greg. I'm the youngest of the 4 boys in the family, and number 7 out of the 8 children in the family. And I'm living in Hong Kong at the moment. I've been here for over 30 years, in fact. So I've just written a short note with my sort of thoughts about Mark. So when I received the news about Mark's passing, I was heartbroken, but honestly not terribly surprised. I'd played the scenario over in my head many times. I knew that a call would come at some point, probably, sooner rather than later. By virtue of my work since around the year 2000, I'm probably one of the few members of the family who was able to see Marc the most over the last 25 years or so. I worked for AT&T, and so whenever I was traveling to the US on a business trip, I would always try and break the journey up by stopping over in LA so I could spend the weekend with Marc before continuing my trip. And despite his very modest living conditions or whatever broken down car he was driving, he was always the consummate host. He'd go out of his way to pick me up at LAX, make me as comfortable as possible during my stays. Oftentimes he would erect a little private tent with an air mattress in the middle of his living room in his one-bedroom apartment. He was genuinely one of the most thoughtful, spiritual, selfless, and caring people I've ever known. Right down to stocking up on my favorite beers and snacks when I came to visit. That's Sam Adams and homemade guacamole with tortilla chips, in case you're wondering. Nothing was ever too much trouble for Marc. He would spend his last dollar, give away the last of his food to make someone else happy or comfortable. In the mid-1990s, my brother Julian stayed with me in Hong Kong for a couple of years, and together we actually helped Marc to finally sort out his travel documents in order to achieve a lifetime ambition of visiting the Barber Center in India. I'm so pleased we were able to do that for him. And of course, armed with this newfound freedom, I was thrilled that Marc was able to visit Hong Kong and to perform my wedding ceremony on the beach in Boracay in the Philippines back in 2006. It was a truly special, unforgettable wedding. And I know that Marc spent many, many hours finding exactly the right poems, the right readings for the occasion. And all of my friends were so taken with his charm, his passion, and his professionalism. In fact, he did such a wonderful job that one of my friends at the wedding invited Marc to officiate their wedding in Thailand a couple of years later. And when our sister Tina remarried in California several years ago, again, Marc did an incredible job putting together a beautiful playlist. He provided all of the kind of sound system and even helped to organize and help decorate the wedding venue. He was always wonderfully kind of hands-on. He'd roll up his sleeves and just do whatever was needed to help out. Sadly, over the last 4 or 5 years, as his health began to deteriorate, Marc declined to see me when I was visiting the US, saying he just wasn't ready to see me. I knew he was having a difficult time, but typical of Marc, he never complained, he never asked for help, and he refused to even talk about his health. I think he was just simply too proud to be seen in any kind of distress. He had a wonderful sense of humor, a wonderfully eclectic taste in music. We would sit for hours playing each other our favorite songs or YouTube video clips. And I'll finish up with a little anecdote from our brother Julian, in fact, that really summed up Marc's sense of humor. Among our father's many achievements, he was an accomplished poet. And as a teenager, Julian aspired to follow in his footsteps. So one day, after spending many hours carefully crafting a poem, he very sheepishly approached Marc as the eldest brother and asked him for his opinion. And after reading the poem several times, he looked at Julian and said, "Julian, this is just terrible. This is the worst poem I've ever read. In fact, it's so bad, come with me." And he led a very forlorn Julian by the hand to the toilet, where they stood on either side of the toilet bowl. And Marc deliberately and ceremoniously crumpled the paper up into a little ball, dropped it into the toilet, and pulled the flush chain with great gusto. They both watched as the paper swirled and bobbed around the bowl, but remained floating on the surface. Marc said, "I see even the toilet is fussy." Rest in peace, my brother. With all our love, that's Greg, Marlene, and my 2 sons, Alex.
Thank you, Greg.
That's right.
Is Rob tomorrow here?
Yes.
Yeah, Rob, you said you wanted to share early in the presentation.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Greg. First of all, I was Marc's roommate in Evanston for a couple of years. I think it might have been 73 to 74, 74 to 75, but The first thing I want to do is to send my love and my deepest empathy out to all of his family members who are gathered here today. Every night, Mark and I, after our work, Mark would sit and smoke a cigarette and talk about your family, talk about everybody in your family with great, great love. And especially, I hope I'm not being too presumptuous here, he would speak with great love about one of his sisters who he called affectionately Pookie Poo. So Pookie Poo, are you present? Perhaps not. And perhaps Greg, you know who that is. At any rate,
I think it's Paula. The youngest sister is Paula,
there you go.
and yeah, I think yeah, it would have been Paula he's talking about.
Yeah.
Probably not with us. Yeah.
Yes, but I'll be brief, but I think my story is of interest because Baba took a hand in this. I learned from Mark later on his circuitous route to coming to America was nobody could engineer it but Mayor Baba. This is my understanding from Mark. He was in London, where he was very active with the London Baba group, I think the one that was founded by Delia de Leon, and very happy there. And this is according to Mark. He received a message from his father, Professor Brutus, to come to America, to come to Evanston, where he would be enrolled in Northwestern University, as I guess Dr. Brutus had gone from Pittsburgh, I imagine, to become professor of political science, and I think chair of the department at Northwestern at that time. So Mark was preparing to go and came, but through whatever reason, he didn't wind up in Evanston, first of all. He wound up in some suburb with a couple of roommates, and he didn't wind up enrolling in Northwestern. He was enrolled in Mundelein Junior College, a little college way out in the suburbs, and he wasn't happy. And he was living with these roommates, and something had gone terribly wrong with the plan. But he came home one day, and there was a coffee table in the flat that he was living in, and there was a copy of the Daily Northwestern newspaper. And on the cover, there was a picture of me serving lunch in a cafeteria-like setting for the Amazing Grace Coffee House, of which I was a member, serving lunch, but behind me, I'd put up a huge poster of Meher Baba. Well, that's all it took for Mark. He immediately found his way to Northwestern, asked where this Amazing Grace Coffee House was. And so so there was one evening, it was about 8 o'clock in the evening, there were performers on stage, people were milling around. I was standing in the area, the audience area. And the next thing I knew, bustling across the room to me was this tall, elegant figure in tears who threw his arms around me and said, Jai Meher Baba. And he was sobbing. I didn't know what to make of this. But when I understood what was going on and understood that he didn't have a place to stay, but wanted to be in Evanston, I had a flat with an extra bedroom. We became roommates for 2 years. It was a remarkable experience for me. Mark was, he just seemed so unlike anybody that I had ever met. This might be a little presumptuous, but he just seemed like an angel. The qualities that I'd like to talk about are he seemed to have no need to speak ill of anyone. He seemed to be constantly holding Meher Baba in the presence of his mind 24/7. If there was something that he needed to help with, he would help with. I was studying classical guitar. I wasn't any good at it, but Mark thought I needed a recital. So he put out notices to the neighborhood and had a recital for this burgeoning classical guitarist in our living room, and many stories like that. His stories of growing up are very touching, and I'm sure Greg and your family, you recall this. He remembers his mother and his siblings rowing out in a boat, rowing out from shore, rowing out to Robbins Island. And his mother would say, that hand waving out that window, the third window from the left, that's your dad, wave to your dad. And when you hear things like that, it's just, you can never forget that. But anyway, I've spoken a bit too long. I just want to send my love out to everybody and tell you how much I love Mark and how much he helped me as I was struggling and starting out in life in the world. But so, John Meher Baba, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Ron. Is Philip and Susan still here?
Yes, we are, Greg. But
Be able to share anything?
you know, if you have what I sent and could read it, that would be great. But we're in such a noisy place.
Yeah,
I really
all right.
don't.
I'll do that.
I'm gonna mute myself again.
All right.
But Jai Baba and love to everybody, and especially again to the family. Yeah.
Philip wrote, we knew Mark chiefly from Chicago in the 1970s when we are all part of a small, very warm and close-knit community of young followers of Meher Baba. There was a lot of talent in the group, and we were inspired to perform music, original plays, puppet shows, and other entertainments, sometimes for each other's birthday parties, often featured a hilarious skit, usually written by Ellis Pines, sometimes for the public. Mark's ability as an actor and his grace as a mime made a special contribution to these efforts. In the mid-1970s, our little group, Meher Players of Chicago, staged an original musical comedy called Wise Men, a Circus of the Self with Songs, which was written by Rob Tomorrow. It concerned a traveling circus in the Depression-era Midwest to which the three magi of the Christmas story come, searching for the Christ child whose star they have sighted. Mark played a gypsy knife thrower in the circus by the name of Emilio. I recall that he wore a red bandana and had a rakish fake mustache. At one point, his wife sang to him, trying to convince him that the love was more important than machismo and pride. Emilio with flashing steel, gypsy blood, and dancing heel. I'm telling you how I feel. Love alone is real. 1977, our first child was born, a daughter named Mira. She was very cute and lovable baby, and Mark adored her. We remember him saying goodbye to her when we left some event, touching his heart, when he left some event, touching our heart and saying dramatically, "Ah, Mira, you have stolen my heart. I will wait for you." We last saw Mark in Los Angeles about 5 years ago when Susan briefly had a research appointment at UCLA. We spent a nice evening with him, having dinner and catching up on news. Your uncle was a unique soul, Philip and Susan Lutkendorf. He wrote that to Azania. So anyway, thank you, Philip and Susan. Ellis Pines, do you have something you can share?
Okay. Yes, we continue with the Chicago saga, honoring Marc Brutus, the soul of creativity at the service of God. Once in the beginning years of Meher Players, our Chicago-based theater group, Kitty Davy made an unusual request to me. I think you should do a wordless play like The Miracle. She was referring to the epic pantomime written by Carl Vollmoeller and starring Maria Carmi, whom we know as Princess Nerina Machiavelli. She talked about how in 1911, her then 12-year-old brother Herbert went to see it each night it played in London. Would it not be fitting for us to do such a play for our silent master? I wondered how we would ever get the skills to perform such a work. Fortunately, Meher Baba had sent to us a skilled mime in the form of Marc Brutus. I remember seeing one of his early works entitled Call to Answer. The piece poignantly seemed to cover the entire feast and famine history of humanity, leading the protagonist at last to kneel before the life-giving love of the Avatar. As a human being, Marc was creativity in motion. Whether speaking or silent, he had that discipline sought by actors to convey exactly the impression required. For example, in our 1973-1974 play, The Queen, Marc had an exceedingly difficult role. He played Queen Maya's Lord Chamberlain, her most senior officer and advisor. For the duration of the play, he must steelily conduct her wish to assault Meher Baba on January 31st, 1969. Portraying this intense resolve was necessary, as only in the end do we see that the Queen herself is eternally in love with the God-man and only doing his will. As we rehearsed, however, ever so often, Marc would break character and say in his most beautiful voice, "Jai Baba!" And that regal voice reminds me of his kindness. The following year, when I was extremely ill, Marc took over the challenge of caring for me and communicating with my parents. My father, a Texan, asked, "Who is the fellow with the king's English?" For all his trials, Marc seemed never to lose that royal use of language. Marc may have inherited his literary and artistic inclinations from his father, the distinguished anti-apartheid South African poet Dennis Brutus, then a professor at Northwestern University. Yet Dennis seemed to have caught the contagious spirit of Meher Baba from his son. One morning in the late 1970s, I was in my office on Michigan Avenue when I received a call that Dennis Brutus was bringing Audie K. Irani to appear with him on the Studs Terkel nationally syndicated radio show. Studs was a politically and literarily minded intellectual. I eagerly attended. Studs was a bit taken back by Audie and asked Dennis why, with all his endeavors, he would be interested in Meher Baba. Dennis replied, though he had so much going on the outside, inwardly, he was starved. An echo of Marc's call to answer mine. Audie then spoke a few minutes on why he himself had followed Baba since he was 16, when Upasni Maharaj told him, "Stick to Marwan through thick or thin." Thus was Marc's life, sticking with Meher Baba, whatever the cost, and fittingly leaving his body near that site, beloved to him, where the Avatar shed his blood and sealed his covenant with this land. Dear Marc, we wish you ever increasing fulfillment as you journey with him into the creation of his new humanity. Avatar Meher Baba.
Meher Baba ki jai.
Thank you. Is Dan Sparks here? I see Jane was here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Would you share some? You spent so much time with Marc over the last couple of years and taking him to doctor appointments and.
Yeah, you. I hadn't prepared any remarks, but I can certainly share something about those opportunities that came up from time to time. Because Marc was in central Oklahoma in a small town, he was very isolated. Prague is an isolated place. And I should say, Marc made the most of it, because as we've been sharing and as everyone knows who's met Marc, he reached out to people wherever he was, and he made friends. He made friends among the citizens of Prague. I know of a couple of those relationships, but I actually don't even know the people, by name. That I just know that that's what was going on. Mark would tell me about that from time to time, like the people that he met on his way to the post office each day. So, case, excuse me, I would just say that under the circumstances, and they were tough. There's no doubt about it. Mark struggled the time that he was here, but except for the fact that at times I encouraged him to. I try to do this with anyone I am in conversation with or discussing things with, if it's appropriate. I wanted him to tell me what's going on and how things are, and he would do that to a point, and then it was kind of like that could clear the air, and then we would just go on to enjoy the time and the day, with whatever was going on, whether I was, picking him up someplace or getting him to, an appointment that he needed to get to. And I didn't do that often, but I did it a few times from time to time over years, the few years that Mark was here. So I always looked forward to getting together with Mark, and it would happen and could happen from time to time, just because Mark enjoyed, the company, the fellowship of other Baba lovers, I think, especially. And so that's what our time together was like when we did get together. Mostly we talked about Baba and, how things were playing out, sometimes in the world, sometimes in Prague, sometimes for Mark, sometimes for me. I don't really have any other thoughts to share about all this now, except that I do have a strong sense that it was, of course, God's timing, and that in God's time, we all are found to be exactly where we need to be. And I think Mark was, as he said, where he needed to be, even though on the surface, some of the things didn't make sense to me and probably didn't make sense to a lot of people. I think Mark just knew that Baba had placed him here in Oklahoma for his purposes. And I think Mark served those purposes always, as you said, with Baba just present, in his thoughts and in his heart, of course. So Jai Baba, condolences to everybody for the grief that you and all of us are feeling. And also, let's celebrate that Mark has moved on to, I will say, presume to say, a better place, and the next place that God is going to take him. Jai Baba.
Baba. Charlie Morton, are you still here?
Great. No, I'd love to say something about Mark.
Yeah.
He's was really one of my very dearest and best friends through a great long period of my life. He lived at our house probably between 10 and 15 years. And he had a permanent room there. He could always come and stay at our house. And he'd work at our house doing things, and he'd work with me on different projects and things. We'd always have something underfoot. and he was just hysterical. He was so much fun. My parents, it was their house, and they absolutely adored Mark. And we'd all have all of our dinners together, our lunches, our breakfasts, everything together. And we'd have it was a very busy house. There's about, oh gosh, there's about 10 people who work there. Maybe so. Usually there was 10 to 15 people in and out all the time. And Mark was just the heart of it all. He was absolutely fabulous. He had a sense of humor that was unbelievable, just incredible. And he could keep all of us just laughing for hours. And we had the most wonderful time. And my memories of Mark are absolutely priceless. Just couldn't be more fun. And I just adore the guy, and we had such a wonderful time together. I just, he spent most of his time either at our house or in his pickup, and so it was kind of a combination. He loved living in his pickup, and at the same time, it was this feeling of good security to him. You always know he had his own bedroom, his own bathroom, everything he wanted right there for whenever he wanted it, and everything. But the truth is, I just adored the guy, and every moment I was around him, I was happy because he was there. And some of his funny jokes were, this house was a huge house that my folks had, and it was used for shows like Dynasty and Heart to Heart and Flamingo Road and everything else. It was a movie set, basically, personality. And so one day Mark was at the front door cleaning, polishing the front door, cleaning the handles and this and that. And I think it was just Mark and I were the only two people home. I was upstairs cleaning something, and all of a sudden I heard the doorbell ring, and someone came to the front door and said, someone trying to sell something. He came to the front door and said, I'd like to speak to the owner of the house. And of course, here's Mark in these old baggy cutoffs and a dirty t-shirt and everything, and said, yes, I'm the owner of the house. And I heard that from upstairs, and I thought, fabulous. This is another Mark prank. We can have fun. So I go down the back stairway, go up, get dressed up in a butler suit, come up, and Mark's sitting there leading this guy on. And I come up and said, sir, would you like me to prepare your car to go to the club tonight, or would you like to dine in? Sort of thing like this. And he thinks for a while. He says, well, I think I'll maybe dine in tonight. And so I go off, and then the guy says to him, wait, I don't understand. How can you be the owner of this house? And here you are cleaning the front door. What, that couldn't be possible. He said, and Mark just looked at him very seriously and said, good help is hard to find. This is a typical, every day with Mark was like this. And the things he did were just hysterical. I mean, absolutely hysterical. And we'd have so much fun together. It was just, and also he loved music. There was always something, and he'd make up nicknames for everybody. And it was sort of funny because he'd always call me Carlo. And then his nickname, I guess some night we were watching some magician on TV or something like that. And Mark loved it. And he kept going on about the guy was the great Pontini. And I said, well, Mark, you're the great Pontini because you're magic itself. You can do anything. You're fabulous. And so from that time on, he ended up with this name Pontini, and all the other people that worked there were calling him Pontini, and he'd give names to every other person there. One of his very favorite persons there was a lady named Margaret, and he called her Makaleka, and she loved Hawaii, and her whole being and persona was basically Hawaiian. And so Mark and her would go to Hawaii together, and they just it was like he was in heaven going, and they'd always be talking in Hawaiian and this and that, having such a good time like that. And Mark, one of the phrases he would always end up ever since then, he would always, when he picked up the phone, you would hear him go, he'd go, it was no longer Marc Brutus. It was, what was it? He said, it was a funny Hawaiian phrase. It'll come back to me in a minute, but he was just so much fun. It was always something that he would come up with time and again, and it just kept you laughing all the time. And he was, to say he was sweet, dear, lovable, that couldn't even scratch the surface. He was endearing. He was fabulous, and I appreciated him, to no end on what a help he was in my life for so many things. And all my family loved him. Everybody in my orbit adored Mark. I mean, I had my nephews there. I had everybody else. I had lots of the Baba family lived there too. I had, different people all come to help work at the house. They're all Baba people. And they all adored Mark too. And it was one of those things. He was so much fun all the time and just a joy. So, no, I'm just so glad to see so many others here today at this, that Greg had put together this wonderful thing for Mark, because, I'm just like you, Greg. I choked up. I still can't take any of the emails off of my computer from Mark or anything else. It's like that. I just love the guy. Yeah. No, it's just really special. So I feel blessed that I had Mark in my life. That's what I feel.
I think we
And
all
when you
did.
said he was like an angel, that's the ultimate, he really was. He was just like that all the time. And, it didn't matter if you're happy or sad, you loved being with Mark. You could just go on for hours, just having
Amen.
fun together. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful, Charlie. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for putting this together. Yeah.
Yeah, a pleasure. I see Sally Gurkha here. Sally, do you want to say anything? You're still muted, Sally.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we do.
Okay, so Marc Brutus and Mark Palmer were the best of friends. And since they were both Mark, some of us would just start calling them Palmer and Brutus. And so I moved to Myrtle Beach later. Palmer moved to Myrtle Beach, and Brutus moved way out west. And years went by, and suddenly Palmer was unexpectedly dying rapidly. And a group of his friends here in Myrtle Beach became his caregivers when he was on hospice. And Brutus came. And Palmer was so touched that Brutus came. And Brutus was helping with everything, that needed to be done. And he had hospice care, and he was going fast. And so many people from all around were sending cards to Palmer. And I found that Brutus was like staying up late at night after he was already exhausted, like really like reading any note or card that anybody sent to Palmer, and just like so feeling the love, taking it in, and then watching for a moment when Palmer would have some consciousness and be able to hear. And he'd bring, here's this card from this person, here's that card from that person, and read it in his incredibly gorgeous voice to Palmer. And, then he would say to Palmer, here, I want to send them a letter back, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say that. And Palmer was so happy. But at one point I just said, oh, Brutus, you're already so tired. And I think, everyone knows Palmer is dying. People are sending him cards, but they don't expect to get an answer. You can just show him the card, and you're putting so much time and care into answering these cards. And I don't think people really expect that. I think you would be fine if you didn't do that. And, he was saying, no, he felt that it really mattered to Palmer, and it made Palmer happy. And it mattered to the people who were sending the love. And so I was thinking today that, maybe some people who see this Zoom could be people who sent a card to Palmer in those days. And if you got a note back from Brutus, he was exhausted, and he really put a lot of care into it and a lot of love. And I realized that it really did mean a lot to Palmer, and it was very touching. So, and we loved we also called them Palmer Azad and El Brute, but they were dear friends. So lots of love.
Thank you. Also, my sister Pamela would like to say something. You're still muted.
All right.
Got it.
Okay. So I met Mark through my brother Greg, and I felt an immediate connection with him. I was very, I don't know, I resonated with his creative sensitivity, his kindness, and his graciousness. And I just wanted to echo something that his brother had mentioned earlier, that Mark was always the consummate host. And that was what I experienced on a few occasions when I was visiting LA, that he just went out of his way to just be welcoming and to do everything that was possible to help. And we kept in touch over the years and connected in LA, Myrtle Beach, and also that trip that Greg Brutus mentioned, that long-awaited trip to India. We happened to be there at the same time, and it was really lovely to just witness Mark's great happiness and joy that he was finally able to have that freedom to travel. He had really been, in a sense, like a person without a country, just really here without the means of moving around freely. His life, as several people have mentioned, was extremely difficult at a number of points. But especially, I would say, the last 4 years, he had an illness in LA that took a great toll. And Mark was hospitalized for quite a while, and in the process lost his job, was not able to continue his schooling. He was planning on getting additional credentials to be able to continue in the work that he was doing with young people. He lost his apartment and ultimately his car. And a few of us were able to help Mark to get out of LA and to relocate to Prague, Oklahoma. And he worked there at the Heartland Center for about 6 months until another health crisis occurred that made it impossible for him to continue working. And I think, though, the time, maybe I guess it was a 2-year period from that point, I think were very difficult. We were trying to get him, encouraging him to move to Oklahoma City, where Dan Sparks lived, to avail himself of some other services that could help. He was always incredibly proud and did not want to accept help, but he just, but he found his way. I think he found his place in Prague and seemed to love being there and wanted to stay. And as Dan mentioned, he made friends among the local townspeople, and always continuing to exude that kind of graciousness. I was fortunate that I was able to see Mark in mid-October of this year. We had planned a gathering of about 20 people, a little more than that, at the Heartland Center. And when Mark knew about it, he wanted to help. And he said, I could help with transportation, because at that point he had just been given his new car and was so proud of it. And so he indeed did. He drove to Oklahoma City, about 60 miles away, and picked up one of our guests and came back and joined us all at the Heartland Center for dinner. And interestingly, there were a few of his old friends from California there. And Mark just seemed very happy reconnecting with people, just sharing. He just seemed happier than I had seen him or experienced him being in years. And I think receiving that car made a big difference, because he, as he had said to me, he said, I need to become a member of the mobility again. When he was waiting on getting a car, it was so important to him to have that means of getting around. And so he wanted to make use of that and share that to help, to be of service to the Heartland Center. And I don't know, I was just, especially on learning the news that Mark had passed, it just struck me what an amazing thing that had been, that Mark had that moment, that time during this visit in October, to really be taking in the love that was coming toward him and the love that was surrounding him. But he was holding it and feeling it, I think, more than he had. And he just seemed relaxed and happy. And I'm glad that I can share that image of Mark with everyone here today, because it definitely has meant a lot to me in saying goodbye to Mark and knowing that he's moved on. And in some ways, I feel, even though there's the sadness and the, that his life was cut short just at that point when things were seeming to be opening up for him, but I do feel like he has moved on to a better place. And for whatever reason he had to go through the suffering that he experienced in this lifetime, I feel like it's finished, and there's a new chapter beginning for Mark. And I'm grateful for that, and grateful to have known him and to have had that example of his incredible genuineness and sincerity and integrity and really high-minded spiritual presence from within that seemed to guide all of his actions. So I just hope we can just celebrate the beauty that Mark was and that he shared with all of us, and to celebrate the new phase of his journey to God, to Baba, and to wish him well. And I do offer my loving condolences to his family and friends, all of us who loved him. Right, that's all.
Thank you, Pamela.
Baba.
You mentioned you saw him in India, and while he was in India, one of the things he did was a mime performance in Mandalay Hall. And I have a video clip of that.
Oh, wonderful.
That he shared with Fred Stankus. Fred, a close friend of Mark's in Los Angeles, who also passed away this past year, had a TV show that he did in Los Angeles, and Mark was a guest one year, and basically the idea of the show with Mark was to talk about his trip to India. And so so they had this video, and in the video you'll overhear a little of the conversation between Fred and Mark, explaining what's going on. So anyway, that's just a little back. It's not the greatest quality, but the mime that he does is outstanding, I think. So one moment, I'll get that screen share going.
Many years ago. Oh, that's you, Mark. Yeah. Many years ago, I used to do mime. And here I'm going to try to recreate an improvisation that I did some years ago. So since most people there don't speak English, so silence is like a universal language, like music. And so you're presenting a story in mime. Right. This is, what should we call this? He's like a balloon seller. He's blowing balloons. Actually, people can probably see this. This is in Mandalay Hall.
And this is what, a Sunday afternoon?
Sunday afternoon, yes.
So they don't watch TV, they have live entertainment.
Yes, music and poetry.
And so what are you doing here? You have a balloon?
Yeah, this is like a balloon seller in a way. So you're watching him blowing up these balloons and then sort of giving them away. A little kid who loses the balloon. And he wants the biggest balloon in the world. So there he gets the biggest balloon. He wants 2 of them. So he gets 2, and there he goes. And in Mime, when you make it turn like that, you mean you're transitioning into another character. So this is now the little boy. And the
balloon burst.
This is the biggest balloon.
Oh, Mark, you're wonderful.
Thanks, Fred. It's so big.
It's pulling you to the heavens.
Right, right. And it's because it's just a little boy. You see, it's just a... And he walks in, and then he just releases it.
That's wonderful. It feels so much love that is.
All right. I know there are probably several people here who'd like to share that have not been called upon. I saw some close friends of Mark. There's probably a lot of close friends of Mark that I don't know, but one that I did see, I want to call on Harry Thomas. You still there? Harry? Deborah Ash, you want to say something?
Yeah.
Hey,
Can you
Deborah.
hear? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
All the time, I hear Baba. Yay. I am thrilled, Greg, that you created a memorial. Okay. I wanted it to happen because, you know, Mark has been a big part of the family life of the LA Baba Center for years and years and years. And I met Mark, Michael Campagna and I, when we came west for our career. And can you see me or only hear me?
No, we're not seeing you right now because you don't have the video selected.
Oh, okay. Well, that's all right. Anyway, so Joey Azzarella, Baba lover from Buffalo, New York, jazz pianist, wanted to come out, and Bonnie Raitt had sat in with us in Buffalo and said, "Go west with all your talent and this and that." And we landed on Fuller Street in Fuller Court, a Spanish colonial studios, Hollywood style, and a U-shaped, you know, and Michael and I were upstairs on the second floor, and in our own compound kind of area. Now, we got there, moved in about 1975. So Mark moved across the street. We did not know each other after he came out to LA, Greg. So he was there, and Michael and I, after reading the discourses from Joe Azzarella, immediately, that was it. We were Baba lovers immediately. We knew. I've been seeking my whole life, actually. And so we hung out and talked about Baba. And then also, a person living there in the front of our Spanish colonial apartment building was Mario Zavala and Linda, who married him. Okay. I'm telling you about a Hollywood community. We were like a family. We hung out, we did Christmas, we sang, we did all kinds of things together. And the other person who showed up was Jeff McGuire, who was working on a script and subletting from let's see, a co-writer director he was working with. So Michael and I were Jeff McGuire's link to Baba. And then so it was Michael and I and Jeff and Mark. We hung out with Rose Bauer, who was the manager. So Mark in the LA Baba family at the Baba Center in Santa Monica, on Little Santa Monica. You all remember that, right, Charlie?
Mhm.
And he helped with programs. He helped with food. I mean, we were a joyous group. Very, Freddie was there. Freddie and Gigi and Mark would make Thanksgiving dinners for everybody and New Year's Eve gathering. Happy, 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 happy. LA Sahabas. Bowsy loved Mark. Ari Kairani, well, that was 77. I don't know if you met him. Kitty, Phyllis, Adele, everybody. Okay. And it was a great period of time together. And at the LA Baba Center in on Van Ness, you know, over there. From 1997, it was owned by us, the LA Baba Center, here above. And the programs that Mark would create were always beautiful from beginning to end. Everything was put together in the fashion of a visionary. Hold on, something's going on with my phone. But can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, he spoke in a slow way, and he and Suhas were great friends. Suhas is the son of Dr. Bindi, who was Meher Baba's doctor and was there when he died and this and that. Suhas was brilliant in the music business. I met Suhas in a gathering, a music artist gathering, and didn't even know who he was. He didn't know who I was. And I told him about Meher Baba, and he started coming to the Baba Center and had great stories to share. And he and Suhas were very, very close, and both were brilliant. And so, you know, Mark wrote some plays, of course, that he performed there. I just know he was, you know, always contributing. LA Sahabas at Pilgrim Pines, he was there. And he lived with Michael and I and Mia for a while, and that was fun. He was a great chef, and as well, and he had this poetic, graceful way of walking and talking and bringing forth Meher Baba with his poetry and Kahil Gibran and Hafiz and Rumi and Stay with God.
Right.
And
Stay with God.
what?
Stay with God. I'm about to play a video clip of Mark reading Stay with God. So.
Okay, so I want to say, Avatar, Meher Baba Kizay, Stay with God. You're free at last. I love you very much, my. We all love you in Baba's loving light. We love you, my, with all our heart, night and day and night. Say Baba.
Hey, Baba. Deborah, Mark, and I also in Los Angeles went to a concert of Hugh Masekela. Remember that, Deborah?
Yeah, I love Hugh Masekela. Yeah.
Yeah. That was nice. Anyway, I'm going to do another.
Greg?
Quick, yeah.
Greg, somehow we lost you. We don't see your face anymore.
Huh. I don't know why, but I'm here.
Yeah, your video's off for some reason.
Huh, okay, hold on. My video is off, huh?
Yeah.
Well, one moment. Stop video. Well, it says, you see me now?
No,
No?
it's okay. Whatever it is, it's supposed to be, but you're in, oh, there you are.
There I am, all right. All right, hold on a second. I'm about to the screen share a video of, it's Mark reading a short 3-minute, 15-second reading from Stay with God, one of his favorite books. And he just reads so beautifully. I just wanted to share that. And Charlie Mills, a friend of mine, who does these beautiful paintings of Mayor Baba, said we could use his paintings to kind of give some illustration to it. So that's what you'll see in just a moment. Let me start screen share.
God Speaks is a book of a book, the book of this age, written by God to appease the intellectual convulsions of the mind of men, who, as its author states, to understand the infinite, eternal reality is not the goal of individualized beings in the illusion of creation. Reality is to be realized by conscious experience. God Speaks is also the first time God has used the English language to tell us something He wanted to tell us. Almost like He had got tired of Sanskrit or Greek or Arabic or Hebrew and had the idea He would learn a new language, the lingo of the majority of the most dumb, of the most gross conscious of human beings that ever were upon the face of the earth, who have forgotten about Him, the most longest and most consistently, and who never remember that they read because, as Kumaraswamy, A.K., pointed out, the spread of literacy is the decline of culture. We can all read, but what do we read? Someone's killed someone, or would like to. Someone's seen something which we haven't and thinks we should know. Someone's invented a new gadget, or a new form of budget, or a different smelling soap, or a new cereal, or the improved scope of a radio aerial, or the odds of horses, or some social behavior courses, or the other various kinds of anusial belching. English, a developed language. Milton, we are told, made it resonate. But why did he have to stand on his head to do it? Milton blind, and Homer all-seeing. No one seems to have mentioned that resonance is a quality of the heart. When Vivekananda got up in Chicago and merely pronounced the word brothers, half the assembly got up on their hind legs and cheered. Vivek knew the blank paper scriptures by heart. In fact, his heart was painted with whiteness. His heart encompassed brotherhood. Brother was he in true sonship of his Guru. So when the particular of this general light condition occurred on his tongue and he said, brothers, the resonance reverberated in the souls of his audience, and their souls remembered their natural posture of verticality, and they stood up.
Greg, I know that Max Reef has been waiting. His computer went
Yes.
off. And
Yes. So Max?
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me, guys?
yes.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful, and I'm so happy you put it together, Greg.
Thank you, man.
And that was a great, the paintings went so well with the verses. It was wonderful. Let me see. My experience with Mark over, wait, let me count. 6, 9, 6, 0, 6, 16, 20, I guess 46 years or something, it was concretely that he came out of Baba and went back to Baba. I first saw him, I lived in St. Louis, Missouri that's where I grew up, and I would wind up back there every so often. And I came to Baba in Ellis Pines' advertising office in Chicago and kept in contact with the Chicago group. And in 1976, they came down to Springfield, Illinois for as part of some festival or something. And there was one Baba lover who lived in Springfield, Illinois. And they performed a play. I don't remember. I imagine probably Ellis wrote it. And I came up from St. Louis, and they actually let me participate because I got to strum my guitar a little bit to accompany something. I don't remember what. But so I saw the play had begun, and between scenes, this beautiful, graceful being dressed in a sadra just like Baba's walked out on the stage. I think he had whiteface on, possibly. And he had these beautiful gestures, and it was Baba, and that was my first view of Mark. And it was just wonderful to be with all my friends from Chicago there. And afterwards, I remember we had a little social gathering, and I told this joke. It's a very silly joke. It's called the Milt Famey joke. You may know it. It's a transposition, inversion of the punchline from a regular saying, and it's a long shaggy dog story, and it ends with this. It's a baseball story. This pitcher who lost the only game he ever lost, the final game of the World Series, because he'd been drinking between innings. And at the end of the inning, when the other team's runner crosses the plate, he looks and he sees a beer fall out of Milt Famey's pocket. And he points to the beer and he says, "That's the beer that made Milt Famey walk us." And everybody laughed. But Mark laughed at that joke for probably half an hour. And that was, I guess, how I knew we would be friends. So over the years, my contact with him was kind of episodic. In a way, it was wonderful. It was like each meeting was a wonderful chapter. I didn't get down to LA very much. I lived in the Bay Area a number of years in the 80s, and then again for the last 20-some years. But one time I did go down there, and Mark, he made a point of picking me up and treating me like a king and taking me to some 30 or 40-story hotel and getting me the biggest drink I'd ever had. And it's like everybody's been saying, he just really made you feel like a king. Then we were in India together. I don't know if he only went once. I think maybe this was his second pilgrimage to India, and I loved walking up the hill with him. I remember we were talking about the song "The Very Thought of You," and he told me that it's been in more movies than any other song, which it deserves to be probably. And then he came up once. He was in Walnut Creek. He was visiting a friend there. He was in our area, and I got him. He had never met my wife, and I got him to let us take him out to a favorite Indian restaurant. And my wife Barbara just loved the way he asked our permission to eat with his fingers, and my wife just loved the grace of his fingers as he put the food in his mouth. Then I think I lost touch again, and I would think from time to time, I wonder how Mark's doing, and then it finally occurred to me to ask, and I learned that he'd gone to Prague, and then I wrote Dan Sparks about it, and Dan said he just had lunch with Mark, and I eventually called Ellis Pines, who gave me Mark's phone number, and I swear to God, I swear to you, Baba, talking to Mark after 15 years, it's just like going back in the heart. It's like plunging into the pool of the heart, and we had, I knew he'd been through a lot of health issues and things, but it was just like no interruption in the love at all. And we talked for a wonderful hour. And then we would email back and forth, but I hadn't called him again for a while. And I just came to my mind one day to give him another call. And we had another hour-long conversation that just left his love just so freshly in my heart. And he told me he had a bad cold. And then I was scrolling on Facebook a few days later, and I read Greg's message that Mark was no more on this earth. And it was I think he and there's possibly one other person, but the closest of my Baba lover friends. I mean, perhaps anyone. I don't even know if my parents are as close, who I really felt the change. And I was driving the next day, that day, and I was that weekend, the next day, to a meeting we were having in the El Cerrito, Berkeley, Baba storefront, and I wrote this while driving. This is not so much about Mark, it's about the experience of something that shocked me into an awareness about life. In memory of Marc Brutus. One of my friends has left the caravan I can see, for the caravan I cannot see. and I can't help feeling bereft. Love is a bridge between the two realms until we meet again, but I can't help feeling somewhat bereft. There are beings, there are connections that are truly made of the most precious gold that will never be severed, and that should be enough. And I need to remember this reminder that although we seem to be traveling together in a group, in the final analysis, that is not entirely true. Jai Baba. Bless you, Mark.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Max.
Baba. Yeah.
We have, I don't know if Azania would like to say anything.
Huey has his hand up. Okay, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Are you giving it to me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. This is Huey, and when I at the Pilgrim Pines saw Mark, he was very impressive to me, and so I was just learning to become more of a performer type of magician rather than just somebody doing tricks. And he helped me a lot. He gave me little pointers, and I got to interact with him that way. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, I didn't have a lot of connections with Mark over the years, but at the regular times we would meet mostly at Pilgrim Pines. But one time he was in India, and it showed me how Baba worked with him and with me. He had come to India, and I was in charge of Amartithi and the technical side of it, and was arranging all the amplifiers. And Mark was doing some kind of video. I never quite found out exactly what he was doing, but he wanted to have a chance to do something where he could have access to take some certain pictures or whatever. I'm not sure, because at the time he came up to me, all the amplifiers for Amartithi failed. The fuses blew. It just like the whole thing just went out. It was very surprising how that happened and what. And I was having to rush down the hill, find a rickshaw to rush down the hill and pick up a whole new set of equipment. It was a very small amount of equipment at those times, but the amps, I had to rush down and get those. And just at the time that Mark was wanting to have this interaction with me and to get the okay to do the something or other, I just rushed away. So I got it all fixed, and Amartithi went on, and I never managed to see him again at that time. But years later, I come up and I find that Mark was really quite upset with me. And it turns out that it was like Baba had arranged this time when I was going to have this impossible circumstance to have to solve for Amartithi. And it would Mark took it as I had blown him off, as not being important enough to talk to or something or other. I'm not sure what his reaction was. But when I saw him years later, we worked out what had gone through and had a really nice, touching heart-to-heart connection to resolve the fact that he had felt hurt. And whether he felt it was some kind of prejudice that I had, or I'm not sure what it was, we resolved that in a very tender way. And so I thought it's nice to see that it was like Baba had arranged something to work with both him and me in this situation, something to relate to. I mean, Mark was outstanding performer, and I always loved watching him and learning from him. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, whenever I was performing with Mark, I always felt and so in awe of him. He is obvious. He is so much more talented than I was, and I don't know what what right I had to be on a stage with him. But anyway, he would continue to do things with me. So,
I'm just
is
gonna take
anybody
one-
else here
Yeah.
who
Mark Triska.
Mark?
Jai Baba, everyone.
Hey, Mark, Lisa.
Hello. Lisa's not here. It's just me. I have a quick Marc Brutus story. We had a lovely time together in India. We happened to end up in the same men's dorm room. This was in the mid 90s, and I hadn't met him before, but since we were roommates and knowing Mark's personality, you can imagine he was quite the life of the party there. It was a dorm room, so there were quite a few people in there, maybe 6 people. And one thing I'll say is that everybody could hold their own in the snoring department. It didn't particularly bother me. I had earplugs when I needed them and that kind of thing. I loved being in that room because of the tone that Marc Brutus set. He just created such joy in that room as we were coming and going, up the hill, down the hill, that kind of thing. So we became a tight little unit, the 6 of us. And the thing about Mark's snoring is, I guess you could call him an all-rounder, because he could snore high, low. He had all kind it was like the Three Stooges on parade there, his particular style of snoring. So he was the king of the snorers. Well, after some time, one of the 6 there, I'm sorry, I don't remember that fellow's name, he decided he'd had enough of the snore fest. So he got himself a single room. And, we saw him pick up his bedding and his belongings and march out to the single room. And there he was camped out for a while. And then one day we were all back in the room, and well, here comes this fellow again with all his stuff. And he's back in the dorm. And we asked him, what happened? He said, oh, it was so lonely without you guys. And I knew what he meant. He meant it was so lonely without Marc Brutus because, like I said, Mark was the life of the party. I'll say it again, he brought such joy. And I'm really glad to hear these wonderful stories of how much joy he brought into everyone else's lives. What a wonderful thing. And so I salute him, Marc Brutus, Avatar, Mayor Baba, DJ, on your journey back to Baba.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else want to share? I see a lot of friends here of Mark.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. Hi.
This is
thank you
Mark's
to-
niece, Azania. Go ahead.
I haven't prepared anything. I've actually, I started a new job, so I've been extremely busy, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for sharing these wonderful memories, and also to Greg for putting this together. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for your coordination of it all too. So, well, with that, we will all say Jai Baba to Mark, and it's wonderful. It's been wonderful knowing him I've known him, I guess, since the late 70s. So it's really added a lot to my life, and I'm sure he added a lot to all of your lives. So best wishes to Mark. Rest in peace.
Jai Baba.
That was wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Baba.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you, Keith.
Greg.
Wonderful to see so many who loved him.
Hi, Jane. I see Jane there. She's being quiet. Jai Baba, sweetheart. Yeah, I know. Just take a minute. You'll find it. The unmute.
There it is. Yes, it's been so touching to hear all the sharing that and the richness of these relationships from so many years, and how Mark touched so many hearts. It's just really sweet to witness everyone sharing. Thank you, Jay
Can I-
Baba. Yes.
Can I read something here that I found online that Mark wrote? A little.
Yes, please.
Sure.
It's not very long, and I hope I can do it justice. Let's see. It's just called Baba Baba. As the dawn light soft awakens with love, the birds to singing, and kisses the sweet scent flowers garden, dancing dewdrops, so too Mayhair, unseen, loves and sustains us. And in the heat of the summer days, compassion comes to cool its every creature, and colors the fields and forest a rich, lush green, with raindrops, so too Mayhair, unseen, loves and sustains us. And as twilight and moonlight transpire music and wine, and the song of laughter gives way for solitary thanks in teardrops, so too Mayhair, unseen, loves and sustains us, is ever with you.
Beautiful.
Jai Baba.
Beautiful. Jai Baba. Jai
Oh,
Baba.
beautiful.
Jai Baba. Jai Baba.
Oh, thank you for this wonderful program, Greg.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Thanks to everybody. So,
Here's Harry Thomas.
Great. Harry's there.
Harry, do you want to say anything?
You're muted, Pamela. What did you say, Greg?
I just was asking if Harry wanted to say anything.
Oh.
I'll see if he wants to unmute. Mm-mm. All right, I'll stop recording if we're done.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruthie.
Hey, Barbara.
It's wonderful. Yep.
Jai Baba.
Thank you.